Welcome back to the deep dive. Usually we take a topic, we find the answers, we package it all up, and then we move on. But today is different. We are not just looking at a historical event, we are, I think, looking at an open wound. We're looking at 51 days in Texas that didn't just end in tragedy, they fundamentally rewired the American psyche. We are talking about the Waco siege.
It's the scar that really hasn't healed. I mean, you can't tell the story of modern America, specifically the story of domestic terrorism, the militia movement, and that deep entrenched distrust of the federal government without starting at the Mount Carmel Center in 1993.
Right.
It is, in so many ways, the origin point for the political friction we still feel today.
Exactly. And I think for a lot of people, Waco is just a shorthand. It's this word that means government overreach or, crazy cult, depending on your Twitter feed.
Yeah, depending on who you talk to.
You picture the fire. You picture that building burning down on live television. But the mission today is to move past those headlines. We've got a massive stack of sources here. Wikipedia articles, the Danforth Report, survivor autobiographies, tactical analyses. We want to unpack the timeline, the theology, which is huge and so often overlooked, and the tactical errors that led to 76 people losing their lives on April 19th.
And I think that word theology is the key. It's the key that unlocks this whole tragedy. If you treat this event just as a hostage situation or just as a gunfight, you miss the entire engine that was driving the people inside that compound.
You net the why.
You miss the why. To understand the fire, you have to understand the belief system that made that fire, in their minds, almost inevitable. We have to look at this through the lens of what sociologists call asymmetric reality.
Asymmetric reality, I like that. Explain that a bit.
It means you had two groups operating in completely different universes. The FBI was in one reality, a secular, tactical hostage rescue scenario. But the Branch Davidians were operating in a completely different one, a biblical apocalyptic script, where the government was literally playing the role of the beast from the book of Revelation.
Wow.
And when those two realities crashed into each other, disaster wasn't just possible, it was practically written in stone.
So let's start at the very beginning. Because before it was a siege, before it was a tragedy, it was just a group of people. And frankly, I was surprised to learn that this didn't start with David Koresh. This wasn't a one-man show, at least not initially.
No, not at all. The group's lineage actually goes way back to 1955. They didn't just pop up out of nowhere in the 90s. They were a schism, a breakaway group from another group called the Shepherd's Rod, who themselves were a breakaway from the Seventh-day Adventists. So you already have this history of splintering.
So they were originally called the Davidians.
The Davidians, yes. And the core belief, right from the jump, was about the imminent apocalypse. They believed they were living in the end times and that the second coming was right around the corner.
They were preppers before prepping was a reality TV genre.
Essentially, yes. They were spiritual preppers. They thought they had a front row seat to the end of the world. And they set up shop on a piece of property near Waco, Texas, which they named Mount Carmel.
And even that name, Mount Carmel, that's not an accident. That is a very specific signal.
Oh, it's hugely significant. It's named after a biblical mountain in Israel.
And it's not just any mountain.
No. It's specifically the site of Elijah's confrontation with the prophets of Baal. In the Old Testament, Mount Carmel is where Elijah challenges the false prophets to a contest to see whose God can call down fire from heaven.
So it's a place of showdowns.
It is a place of spiritual warfare. So, simply by naming their home Mount Carmel, the geography itself was steeped in this idea of a final confrontation. They were scripturally priming themselves for a fight from the very beginning.
Okay, so you have this group, the Branch Davidians, living on this compound. They're waiting for the end. But then enters the man everyone knows, Vernon Howell.
Right. Before he was David Koresh, he was Vernon Howell, a stuttering, dyslexic, high school dropout, aspiring rock musician, and an intensely charismatic Bible teacher.
Quite the resume.
Yeah. And his rise to power wasn't exactly a Democratic vote. It was a succession struggle that, and I'm not exaggerating, reads like a thriller novel.
Oh, this is where it gets really wild. I have to do a little story time here because when I read this in the notes, I had to double check it was real. So the leader at the time is Lois Roden. She passes away. And Vernon Howell is fighting for control against Lois's son, George Roden. And George Roden, he had a very specific, very macabre way he wanted to settle who was the true prophet.
It is one of the most bizarre chapters in American religious history, and it almost never makes the documentaries. It's just too strange.
George Roden literally digs up a corpse, a woman named Anna Hughes from the Davidian cemetery. He drags this body out and challenges Vernon Howell to a resurrection contest.
So what?
A resurrection contest. He says, essentially, whoever can bring this dead woman back to life is the true leader.
It sounds like fiction. It sounds like something from a gothic horror story.
It does. And, you'd expect the cult leader type to maybe try a seance or start chanting, but Howell actually does the rational thing here. He goes to the police.
Which is fascinating.
He goes to the McLennan County Sheriff's Office and says, hey, this guy dug up a body. That's abuse of a corpse.
Which shows a certain level of cunning. He knew he couldn't win a resurrection contest, so he tried to win a legal one. But the prosecutors, they refused to file charges without proof.
They needed evidence.
They needed evidence that the corpse had been disturbed. They told him, bring us a photo and we'll press charges.
Which led to the gunfight. Howell gets 7 of his followers. They were later dubbed the Rodenville 8. Mm-hmm.
They all dress in camouflage, carrying rifles, and they sneak onto the property to get a photo of the corpse as evidence.
This is just unbelievable.
George Roden catches them. He's armed with an Uzi. A gunfight breaks out. It's this chaotic shootout in the middle of Texas over a dead body.
Just a shootout over a corpse.
Exactly. Roden gets shot in the hand and chest. Howell and his followers go to trial for attempted murder. The jury hangs. They couldn't decide if it was self-defense or not. Eventually, Roden goes to jail for unrelated crimes, including contempt of court.
And that's how Vernon Howell takes the throne.
That's how he becomes leader. It wasn't a divine appointment. It was the result of a gunfight, a mistrial, and his rival self-destructing.
It sets a violent tone for his leadership right from the start. But once he is in charge, things change rapidly. In 1989, he releases what he calls the New Light audio tape. And this is the pivot point. This is where the theology shifts from we are waiting for the end to I am the center of the end.
New light is a term often used in these kinds of religious circles to describe a new revelation that supersedes the old laws. And Howell's new light was effectively a sexual revolution for one man.
New light sounds positive, but the content was pretty dark. This is where the polygamy comes in, right?
Yes. The doctrine essentially stated that Koresh, he legally changed his name from Vernon Howell to David Koresh in 1990, was the sinful Messiah.
What does that even mean, sinful Messiah?
It's a complex idea he developed. He taught that he had to live a sinful life to understand sinners, and that he was a perfect man in a sinful body. But the mandate that came with it was that he, and he alone, was commanded by God to procreate with the women in the group to build a new house of David. And this wasn't just about unmarried women. He dissolved the marriages of his followers.
He broke up couples.
He separated married couples. He told the men they had to be celibate to prepare for the coming spiritual war, but he claimed entitlement to their wives. He taught that all the women in the group belonged to him.
That's an incredible level of control.
The men had to be celibate, but Koresh could have, and claimed he was entitled to, up to 140 wives.
And some of these wives were underage. We're talking girls as young as 12 or 13.
Correct. There is significant documentation and testimony from former members regarding his marriages to minors. And that is crucial context. Because while the later siege was about guns, the initial heat, the initial scrutiny from the community and the press was very much driven by these allegations of statutory rape and child abuse.
The whispers were getting out.
The community in Waco was hearing these stories from people who had left the group.
Which brings us to the investigation, because while the abuse was the moral outrage, that's not what brought the federal government to the door.
Exactly. Statutory rape is a state crime. The federal government, specifically the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the ATF, needed a federal angle to get involved. They don't investigate child abuse. They investigate weapons.
And that is where the spark comes in.
That's the spark.
It started with a UPS driver, didn't it?
It did. May of 1992. Yeah. A UPS driver is handling a package destined for the compound. It breaks open, and out roll grenades.
Just hand grenades rolling around in a delivery truck.
Now, to be fair to the Davidians, and this is an important detail, these were inert grenade holes. They were hollow. There were no explosives inside them. Legally, they were just heavy paperweights.
Okay.
But then came the other deliveries. Black gunpowder, powdered aluminum, cardboard tubes.
Okay, I'm not a chemist, but even I know that if you have grenade hulls and you order gunpowder and aluminum powder, you aren't making paperweights anymore.
Precisely. That is the inference the ATF made. The combination of those materials is used to create explosives. They believe the Davidians were building live grenades. And then there's the mag bag.
The mag bag, that was their gun store, right? Because we have to clarify, they were technically legal gun dealers.
They were. Paul Fetta, a high-ranking member, was a licensed federal firearms dealer. They had a legitimate business called the Mag Bag. They traveled to gun shows, they sold vests, ammunition, surplus gear. It was a revenue stream for the group. But the ATF agent investigating, David Aguilera, noticed they were buying very specific items in bulk.
AR-15 conversion kits.
Exactly, AR-15s.
Okay, let's unpack the technical side here because this is where the legal argument gets really tricky. It is not illegal to buy an AR-15. It is not illegal to buy parts for it.
Correct. In the United States, owning a semi-automatic AR-15 is legal. A semi-automatic fires one round for every pull of the trigger. Bang, bang, bang. What is illegal, without very expensive and rare federal permits, is a fully automatic machine gun. You pull the trigger, you hold it down, and it goes BERT. Continuous fire.
And the ATF suspected they were making the BERT kind.
Yes. They were buying parts like drop-in auto sears and other components that, if you file them down or modify them just right, can convert a legal semi-automatic rifle into an illegal, unregistered machine gun. The ATF operated under the theory of constructive possession. It's a legal doctrine.
What does that mean?
It means that even if they didn't catch Koresh physically firing a machine gun, possessing all the necessary parts to assemble one, with no other logical use for those parts, is itself a crime. The intent becomes the crime.
So you have the ATF building this case. They suspect a massive stockpile of illegal machine guns and homemade grenades. They name the operation Showtime, which, honestly, maybe tells you a little bit about the mindset going in.
It does suggest a desire for a high-profile success. The ATF was actually under some pressure at the time. They'd had some bad press, and they needed a win to justify their budget to Congress. A big raid on a dangerous cult looked good on paper.
But the clock was ticking because of the press. We mentioned the abuse allegations earlier. The local paper, the Waco Tribune-Herald, was about to drop a bombshell.
The Sinful Messiah series. The reporters had been digging for months. They had interviews with defectors, details about the polygamy, the child abuse, the weapons stockpile. It was a massive expose.
And the ATF knew it was coming.
They did. They actually met with the editors of the newspaper and begged them not to publish it yet.
Why? What was their reasoning?
They feared that once the article came out, Koresh would know the walls were closing in. He would fortify the compound. He would be on high alert. It would ruin their element of surprise for the raid.
But the newspaper had a duty to publish, and they did. On February 27, 1993, the first part of The Sinful Messiah hits the newsstands all over Waco.
And Koresh sees it. He knows he's been exposed.
So the ATF panics. They feel like their hand has been forced. They have to move their timeline up. They decide to execute the raid the very next morning, Sunday, February 28th.
They accelerated the plan. Codename Showtime was a go.
The plan was a sudden daylight raid. Surprise was everything. They needed to hit hard and fast, catch the Davidians completely off guard, separate the men from the weapons, and serve the search and arrest warrants. But, and this is one of those truth is stranger than fiction moments, the surprise was blown by a conversation with a mailman.
It's a staggering coincidence, a true butterfly effect moment that sealed the fate of everyone involved. A local TV cameraman who had been tipped off that something big was happening at the compound, was out in the area.
He's trying to get a scoop.
He's trying to get the shot. He gets lost on the rural roads. He sees a mail carrier doing his route and pulls over to ask for directions. He basically says, "Hey, can you tell me where the Rodenville place is?" Which is what locals called it. "I hear the feds are raiding it today."
And the mail carrier.
The mail carrier happened to be David Koresh's brother-in-law.
I mean, you cannot write that script. If you put that in a movie, the audience would groan and say it's too convenient.
It's unbelievable. So the reporter tells the brother-in-law the raid is coming. The brother-in-law, Perry Jones, immediately goes straight to the compound and tells Koresh.
So the surprise is gone.
And that changes everything. The entire premise of the raid speed and surprise evaporated in that one moment. Now, the Davidians aren't sleeping. They are in their Sunday prayer service. They are arming up.
And there was an undercover agent inside.
Yes, Robert Rodriguez. He had been inside for weeks, posing as a Bible student. He was in the compound when the warning came. Koresh actually confronts him. He pulls him aside, looks him in the eye, and says, "They're coming, Robert. The ATF and the National Guard are coming."
That must have been terrifying for Rodriguez. His cover is blown.
Absolutely. Rodriguez has to think fast. He makes an excuse, claims he needs to leave. He gets out, runs to a payphone, and frantically calls the ATF commanders. He tells them explicitly, they know the element of surprise is gone. They're getting their guns and their vests on. Call it off.
And this is the pivotal moment of decision. The commander on the ground, Chuck Sarabin, knows the surprise is blown. Koresh knows they are coming. Common sense says you call it off, set up a perimeter, and negotiate. But the order is given. Go anyway.
Showtime proceeds. For decades, tactical experts have criticized this decision as one of the worst in law enforcement history. It was likely a mix of adrenaline, sunken costs, they had almost 80 agents in cattle trucks already moving down the road, and institutional arrogance.
They thought they could still pull it off.
They thought, we are the federal government. Even if they know we're coming, they'll see our overwhelming force and surrender. They fatally misjudged their opponent.
So 9:45 a.m., the cattle trucks arrive, and that's a detail that always sticks with me. They pulled up in these big white cattle trailers covered in tarps to try and look like local ranchers.
It was a failed attempt at subterfuge.
Agents in full tactical gear, helmets, black uniforms, they jump out, and then the shooting starts.
And this is one of the biggest points of contention that remains to this day. Who shot first?
It's the Han Solo versus Greedo of federal law enforcement.
In a very dark way, yes. The ATF's official story is that they were fired upon from the windows and the front door as they approached. They say the Davidians opened up on them immediately. The Davidians, specifically the survivors, have always maintained that the ATF fired first. They claim that agents shot the dogs that were in the kennel near the front of the building, and that gunfire triggered the Davidians to return fire in defense of what they saw as an unprovoked attack.
Whatever started it, it turned into a war zone instantly. You had agents trying to get on the roof to breach the concrete room they believed was the armory. You had National Guard helicopters creating a distraction and taking fire.
Yes, the helicopters were supposed to be a diversion, but the Davidians fired on them with high-powered .50 caliber rifles. The pilots reported bullets coming through the floor of the choppers. They had to pull back immediately. On the ground, it was just chaos. The agents were pinned down behind vehicles with no good cover.
The casualties were significant and fast.
4 ATF agents were killed. 16 were wounded. Inside, 6 Davidians died in the initial firefight. David Koresh himself was shot in the hand and the stomach.
And eventually the unthinkable happens for a federal raid. They run out of ammo. The ATF literally ran low on ammunition.
And they were in a sustained firefight they were not prepared for. They had to negotiate a ceasefire with Koresh over the phone just to withdraw safely.
So it was a tactical defeat.
It was a tactical defeat and a public humiliation. They had to retreat, leaving their dead initially, until the ceasefire allowed them to retrieve the bodies. And instead of a quick service of a warrant, the United States government was now in a 51-day standoff.
This is where the ATF steps back and the FBI takes command, specifically the Hostage Rescue Team HRT. And for the next 51 days, the world watched this slow-motion train wreck unfold.
And conflict is the right word to describe the FBI's approach internally, too. Because inside the FBI command post, you had a civil war happening. You had 2 very different philosophies clashing constantly.
The negotiators versus the tactical team.
Exactly. You had the FBI negotiators who wanted to talk Koresh out. Their approach was patience. They wanted to build trust, listen to his theology, de-escalate. They treated it as a complex psychological puzzle. And then you had the tactical team, the HRT. These are the door kickers. Their philosophy was pressure, constant escalating pressure. They wanted to make life inside the compound so miserable that it would force them out.
It was like good cop, bad cop, but they weren't coordinating. They were actively sabotaging each other.
That's a perfect way to put it. The negotiators would be on the phone having these long, rambling discussions with Koresh, which the tactical guys dismissed as Bible babble. The negotiators would be saying, David, we want to work with you. We want a peaceful resolution. And at the exact same time, the tactical teams are outside cutting the power, cutting the water, and driving M60 tanks over the Davidians' personal cars and motorcycles.
It sends a completely mixed message. We want peace, but we just crushed your Chevy.
It destroyed any trust the negotiators were trying to build. Koresh would get on the phone and say, you say you want to help, but your tanks are destroying my home. It validated his paranoia. It proved to him they weren't sincere.
And then came the psychological warfare tactics, the psyops. I read the list of sounds they blasted over loudspeakers all night to deprive them of sleep. It's an incredible list.
It is. They used jet plane noises, pop music from artists like Nancy Sinatra, Tibetan Buddhist chanting, and most infamously, the recorded screams of rabbits being slaughtered.
Why rabbit screams?
The theory is it's a deeply primal, unsettling sound that bypasses rational thought and creates stress. It was all about sensory overload, sleep deprivation. The idea is to break their will to resist.
But this is where the asymmetric reality comes back in a huge way.
This is the critical failure. Scholars like James Tabor and Philip Arnold, experts in apocalyptic religions, they tried to warn the FBI. They were desperately calling the command posts, sending faxes, trying to tell the commanders, you are dealing with a man who believes he is living in the fifth seal of the book of Revelation.
Explain that. What does the fifth seal mean for them?
In Koresh's specific theology, the fifth seal is the time when the faithful are persecuted and martyred by the forces of Babylon, which, in his mind, was the U.S. government. He believes the beast is coming to destroy them before the end.
So when you roll up in tanks and blast rabbit screams,
You aren't breaking his will. You are playing your part in his movie. You are validating his prophecy.
that's the paradox of force we talked about in the intro.
Exactly. Every tank that crushed a fence, every helicopter that buzzed the compound, every threatening message just confirmed to his followers that Koresh was a true prophet. Look, he could say, I told you the beast would come, and here they are. The FBI thought they were applying tactical pressure. In reality, they were applying theological glue. They were bonding the group tighter together against their prophesied common enemy.
There were some successes in the negotiations, though. We shouldn't glaze over that. 35 people did come out.
That is true. 21 children and 14 adults were released, mostly in the early stages of the siege. But as the tactical pressure ramped up, the exits stopped completely. Koresh kept moving the goalposts.
He made a promise about a radio broadcast, right?
He did. He demanded that a 58-minute sermon of his be played on national radio. He promised that if they did it, he would lead his people out. The FBI, desperate for a breakthrough, arranged for it to be broadcast. They played the tape.
And he didn't come out.
He didn't come out. He claimed God had spoken to him again and told him to wait. To the FBI, this was the ultimate act of bad faith. They saw him as a liar and a manipulator who would never come out peacefully.
And then came the manuscript. This was the final delay, right?
Yes. In mid-April, as the siege dragged on, Koresh claims he has been authorized by God to finally write his interpretation of the seven seals from the book of Revelation. He promises that as soon as he finishes this manuscript, he and all his followers will surrender.
And the FBI is sitting there thinking, is this just another stalling tactic, another radio broadcast promise?
The negotiators were actually hopeful. They thought, okay, this is different. He has a concrete task. Let him write. If he finishes the manuscript, maybe he comes out. It was a tangible goal. But the tactical commanders were done waiting. They were out of patience. They saw the manuscript as just another lie. Conditions inside were deteriorating. No water, no electricity, reports of sewage backing up. And there were persistent reports of ongoing child abuse.
That was the justification given publicly.
Yes, the justification for the final assault was the safety of the children. Though it's worth noting that HRT leaders later denied having any concrete evidence of ongoing abuse during the siege itself.
So the decision goes up the chain. Janet Reno, the newly appointed Attorney General, she's only been on the job for a few weeks. She has to make the call. She approves the plan for the final assault.
April 19, 1993. The plan was to use CS gas, tear gas, but not just spray it like you would for crowd control. They used combat engineering vehicles, CEVs. Think of a tank with a giant boom arm attached to it, like a construction vehicle on steroids.
They were punching holes in the building.
Right. The plan was to drive the CEV right up to the building, ram the boom through the exterior wall, and then inject the CS gas deep into the structure. The idea was to create a gas chamber effect, make the air inside so unbreathable that the mothers would grab their children and run out the front door into the waiting arms of the FBI.
It was supposed to be a non-lethal solution to end the standoff.
That was the plan, but they didn't run out.
No.
They hunkered down, some put on gas masks, some retreated to a concrete bunker inside the main building, a room they called the cooler. They had been preparing for this moment for 51 days. They believed this was the final test of faith.
The operation starts at 6:30 a.m. They are punching holes, pumping gas for hours. The Davidians are firing back at the tanks. And then around noon, the fire.
12:07 p.m. to be precise, the first wisps of smoke are spotted. And because of the high gusting winds on the Texas plain and the fact that the building had been punched full of holes, creating a perfect draft, within minutes, the entire wooden structure became a raging inferno.
And this is the part that everyone argues about. Who started the fire? This is the central controversy of Waco.
It is. If we look at the government side, the official investigation, the Danforth report, which was a massive special counsel investigation years later, concluded definitively that the Davidians started the fire themselves.
What was their evidence for that?
Their primary evidence was audio recordings from listening devices the FBI had managed to plant inside the compound. On those tapes, you can hear voices saying things like, "Have you poured it yet?" and "Light the fire." They also point to the fact that the fire started in 3 different places at once.
Right, which suggests it wasn't an accident.
Correct. Aerial infrared footage shows smoke rising from 3 distinct locations almost simultaneously, which suggests a coordinated effort to burn the building down from the inside. The government's view is that this was a mass suicide, or a final act of apocalyptic defiance.
But the survivors and critics tell a very different story.
They do. They have 2 main theories. The first is that the CEVs, the tanks, when they smashed through the walls, knocked over propane tanks or kerosene lanterns, starting the fire accidentally. The other theory, and this was a huge controversy, is that the FBI used pyrotechnic tear gas rounds that ignited the building.
Let's pause on that because that was a massive cover-up, wasn't it? For years, the FBI denied using anything that could spark a fire.
Absolutely. For 6 years, from 1993 to 1999, the FBI categorically denied, under oath and to Congress, that they had used any pyrotechnic devices on April 19th.
And then they admitted it.
Then, in 1999, under intense scrutiny and facing new evidence, they finally admitted that, yes, they did use a few military-grade pyrotechnic CS gas rounds.
That is a huge admission, a game changer.
It is. However, and this is the government's crucial defense, they claimed these rounds were fired early in the morning, hours before the fire started at noon. And they claimed they were fired at a concrete construction pit, a bunker located away from the main wooden building to try and clear it out. They maintained those specific rounds did not and could not have started the main fire.
But the damage to their credibility was done. That admission alone destroyed so much trust. People asked, if they lied about the pyrotechnics for 6 years, what else are they lying about?
It fueled the conspiracy theories, absolutely. It gave oxygen to the idea of a cover-up. But regardless of what the spark was, the result was horrific. 76 people died in that fire.
Including the children.
Including somewhere between 20 and 28 children. David Koresh died, though he didn't burn to death. His body was found with a gunshot wound to the head. The official finding is that it was likely a mercy killing or suicide by proxy committed by his top lieutenant, Steve Schneider, who then killed himself.
The images of that building burning. I mean, you watched it live on TV if you were old enough. It was horrific. It looked like hell on earth. And in the aftermath, the questions just piled up. You mentioned the Danforth report clearing the government of starting the fire, but it did find them negligent in other ways?
Yes, specifically regarding the failure to disclose the use of the pyrotechnics. But there are other lingering physical evidence issues that keep the skepticism alive. The missing door is a big one.
The steel door from the front of the building.
Exactly. The right-hand entry door. The Davidians claimed that the ATF shot in through that door during the initial raid in February, unprovoked. They said the bullet holes would prove the agents shot first. But after the fire, when the debris was cleared by federal authorities, the left door was there, but the right door was gone. It had disappeared.
That is incredibly suspicious. I mean, how do you lose a 200-pound steel door from a crime scene that is under complete federal control?
It's the kind of detail that keeps the controversy alive. Then you have the FLIR footage, forward-looking infrared.
This is the thermal imaging, the black and white footage from the airplanes circling above.
Right. Critics, and a documentary called Waco. The rules of engagement claim that on the final day, you can see rhythmic flashes coming from the government lines toward the back of the building while it's burning.
And they argue these flashes are.
They argue these are machine gun muzzle flashes. The accusation is that agents were shooting at Davidians who were trying to escape the fire from the rear of the building.
That is a dark accusation, that the FBI was gunning down people fleeing a fire.
It is the darkest accusation leveled against the government. Now, the government brought in expert after expert who testified that those flashes were reflections of sunlight on debris or heat signatures from the fire itself causing artifacts in the camera. The Danforth report supported the government's view, noting that none of the victims' bodies had bullet wounds consistent with being shot from outside. But for those who distrust the official narrative, the visual of those flashes remains very compelling.
So the smoke clears, the trials happen, 12 Davidians are indicted. What happened to them?
It was a mixed bag in court. They were acquitted of the most serious charge conspiracy to murder federal agents. The jury clearly felt the self-defense argument regarding the initial raid, that they thought they were being attacked by an unknown force, had some weight. But several were convicted of lesser charges, like voluntary manslaughter and various weapons charges. They received very stiff sentences, some up to 40 years, largely due to the machine gun definitions, though some of those sentences were reduced later after a Supreme Court ruling.
But the real legacy of Waco wasn't in the courtroom. It was out in the world. It was in the minds of people who were watching this all unfold on their TVs.
That is where the tragedy compounds. Because for a specific subset of the American population, Waco became a rallying cry. It became proof positive that the federal government was tyrannical, that they would kill their own citizens, kill children, just to seize guns.
And one man in particular was watching very, very closely.
Timothy McVeigh.
He actually visited Waco during the siege, didn't he?
He did. There are photographs of him there. He drove down to Texas, he stood at the roadblocks, and he sold bumper stickers with anti-government slogans. He saw the government tanks surrounding the building. He saw the fire on TV. And exactly 2 years later, to the day,
April 19th, 1995.
April 19th, 1995, Timothy McVeigh parked a Ryder rental truck loaded with thousands of pounds of fertilizer explosives in front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. He detonated it, killing 168 people, including 19 children in a daycare center.
And he didn't hide his motivation. It was clear.
No. He explicitly cited Waco and another federal standoff at Rupert Ridge as his motivation. He saw it as revenge. He viewed the Murrah Federal Building as a legitimate target, specifically because it housed offices for the ATF and other federal agencies he blamed for Waco. So you cannot talk about the Oklahoma City bombing without talking about Waco. They are inextricably linked. Waco was the radicalization point for McVeigh and the burgeoning militia movement of the 1990s.
And it hasn't gone away. We mentioned this at the top. Even today, in 2024, there are echoes.
Yes. Just recently, Canadian authorities arrested men with ties to their military who were accused of creating an anti-government militia. And one of the suspects was recorded in a wiretap explicitly warning of another Waco. The symbolism of Mount Carmel is still incredibly potent in the anti-government extremist sphere. It is the Alamo of that movement.
It's entered the culture, too. You have the Paramount miniseries, multiple documentaries on Netflix. It's a story we keep retelling, trying to understand it. But I guess the real question is, have we learned the lesson?
That is the big question. The FBI did change. To their credit, they updated their negotiation protocols after this. They are much more hesitant to use that kind of overwhelming tactical force in a barricade situation now. They try to integrate behavioral science and religious experts more, but the scar remains. The trust that was broken that day, for a lot of people, has never been fully restored.
So, what does this all mean? When we look back at the whole timeline, from the digging up of a corpse to the Sinful Messiah article, to the lost element to surprise with the mailman, to the rabbit screams, to the fire, it feels like a tragedy of errors, a cascade of failure.
It was a cascade of failure. A failure to understand religion, a failure of tactical discipline on day one, a failure of communication between the negotiators and the tactical commanders during the siege, and of course the catastrophic failure of a leader inside, David Koresh, who was willing to sacrifice his followers, including children, for his apocalyptic vision.
It's a lot to process, an incredible weight.
It is. But if I can leave you with one final thought, it's this. We often think of force as the ultimate problem solver. If you just have enough tanks, enough gas, enough armed men, you can control any outcome. But what Waco teaches us is the paradox of force.
Break that down for us one last time.
When you apply overwhelming aggressive pressure to a group that already believes the world is ending and that the government is the prophesied enemy, that force doesn't subdue them. It validates them. It makes their delusions real. It confirms their prophecy. And once you make their apocalypse real, you can no longer stop it.
That is a chilling thought. Validating the apocalypse.
It is. And it's the question we need to remember every time we see a standoff like this begin to unfold. Are we solving the problem, or are we just playing the role they wrote for us in their end-of-the-world script?
That is going to stick with me. Thank you for walking us through this. It's a dark chapter, but one we clearly need to understand.
My pleasure. It's important history to grapple with.
And thank you for listening to this deep dive. As always, check the source notes if you want to fall down the rabbit hole yourself. There is plenty more there. Until next time, stay curious.
And stay critical.
Bye for now.